started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Brian McCarthy, and tonight we're going to take a journey to the past to visit something we know well, at least we thought we did. This is the last year of the Swordfish Pool, and we and other generations have known it. I don't know how to
move the speaker that way.
Yeah.
Relax, Mark. It's all admission. It's free.
Okay, oh, that's better. Now we're talking. Okay. All right. So this is the last year of the Swordfish Pool. It was originally built in 1914, and it has lasted 107 summers. It's the second oldest pool in the United States, after the Underwood Pool in Belmont, Massachusetts, which is a public pool. It actually just reopened last week after COVID. It was out for years. The next closest pool, the second oldest pool after this one, the third pool is the Underwood Pool in Belmont, Massachusetts, which, that's the first one. The next closest one that I could find was the 1915 pool in Austin, Texas, which is a youngster in comparison to it since we opened a year earlier. Our pool has been enjoyed by thousands upon thousands of members and visitors over the years. Some of you, like me, may have learned to swim in it. The land on which it sits, and we're sitting now, except for me who's standing, has had 4 owners since 1914, and the pool has survived numerous hurricanes and northeasters, including the 38 hurricane, and hopefully the one in the next 2 days. But the one thing it couldn't survive was the government and the changing New York State Health Department regulations. So tonight we celebrate our old pool in its last summer, and we honor the memory and deeds of those closely associated with it. Next year, youngsters will be learning to swim in a brand new, beautiful pool with roughly the same dimensions, and we will be starting new traditions. A few thank yous first to Michael Brocky and Ben Bertu for all of their help in putting this night on. To Michael D'Onofrio, our chef, and his crew for the refreshments and the dinner earlier tonight, if you enjoyed that. To Joy Hines for encouraging this presentation, and to several of you, including members Joe Kern, Mimsy Morgan, and Susie LaVista, who's the Hampton Bays librarian, who dug into their archives. Special thank you to Meredith Medina Murray, who I think is here tonight, who is with her husband, Bob. Meredith helped me inspire this talk with her book in the history of the Quantic Beach Club. That newcomer down the road, it was built in 1927. And also to the Westhampton Historical Society and our village historian, Ron Mickney, who helped together with Denise Olson of Village Graphics with some of these visual presentations. I also want to thank my wife, who is very tired of me saying to her, "Did you know that?" And so, Shelley, tomorrow you get your dining room table back, the table out on the porch, and the kitchen table, because it's covered with stuff right now. The land we're sitting on has a storied history, much of which has been almost forgotten. With few exceptions, we are principally going to cover the period from the early part of the 20th century until roughly the late 1950s and early 1960s. So if you won the 40-yard freestyle in 1982 and are waiting to hear about your exploits at that year's annual swimming races, you'll have to wait for a later version of this talk. As you will see, we are fortunate that much of the earlier period we'll cover occurred during the golden age of postcards in the United States. So with that, on with the show. So this is a picture of the Beach Lane Bridge from a card that was postmarked in 1907. It's a pretend you're standing at Rogers and looking inland. The buildings is basically the downtown village, and let's see if this works. Right there is the inn. which was built a few years earlier. You notice the horse and carriage, the bridge. While there were earlier bridges, wooden bridges that were at this narrow spot between the mainland and the Barrier Beach, in 1880, a new drawbridge designed by Silas Jessup of Quogue was built, and this is that bridge. Notice the horse and the carriage, as I mentioned. At this point, there was only one road. There was only a road on the Barrier Beach that went from the Beach Lane Bridge to the Quogue Village line. The road to the west, where we are, was built later. In the late 1890s, houses started to be built on what became Dune Road to the west of the Beach Lane Bridge, as we'll see. Further down in town, it's tough to see in this one, but basically right around there is the Howell House. The Howell House was originally built earlier, but it was remodeled just before this postcard in 1906, after first being built in 1868, after P.T. Barnum influenced Mortimer Howell to open a place for visitors, and he was an investor in the Howell House. Okay. This is a picture of the inn. This was the boarding house era of Westhampton, when large boarding houses catered to visitors from New York City and up west who came out on the Long Island Railroad. The inn was a long-standing example of the boarding houses. It was built in 1903 and ended its run in September 1967. The day after my brother Peter and his wife Holly had their wedding reception there. They didn't trash the place. It just happened to be on the schedule. This is the Moorland. The Beach Lane Bridge made getting to the beach walkable from the village by way of Beach Lane, and the village developed in that direction with an increasing summer population. Here's another example that came. It's another addition that came to the Beach Lane to cater to visitors, the Moorland Hotel. By the first decade of the 20th century, Westhampton was establishing itself as a summer vacation spot. Okay, where we are, there was no bridge access to the beach prior to 1888, but there was activity. Beach bathing stations or access by boat existed further west from here. By the way, that's east, that's west. Just to the west, roughly between here and Luron, sat the Potonk Life-Saving Station. The U.S. Life-Saving Service was established by Congress in 1878. Potonk, or Westhampton as it says on the card, and sometimes it's called Petonk, was one of the 30 life-saving stations that lined the south shore of Long Island by 1914, and was one of the earliest ones, predating Congress's formal recognition, as it was in existence as early as 1856, 4 years before Lincoln was elected president. The men followed a rigorous training schedule. Every day, the keeper and the surfmen practiced life-saving skills such as launching lifeboats. Later on, you'll see, I think we still have one at the Swordfish in the 1960s. They were on constant watch for ships in distress from the station's tower and kept records of passing vessels. At night, the surfmen walked patrols along the beach, one man heading each way from their station and meeting the surfmen from the next station midway. Many of you know the Quogue station is still is actually still a private house down the road. They exchanged checks and returned to their station. They were prepared at all times to go out in the water, no matter what the weather conditions, to save lives. Now, here's a salty lot of men. This is a picture of the life-saving crew. The men that manned the stations was a tough lot, usually fishermen from local families. That's Franklin Jessup, right there. Nathan Jessup's brother. Nathan will be an important part of our story. Franklin was the keeper of the station in 1872, and then from 1881 to 1896. That looks like a fox that they're holding right there. That may have been the last fox on Dune Road. Okay, now, this is a little hard to see, but I'm going to try to point out where things are. Now, the Jessups owned a lot of the land in the Potonk section of Westhampton, including the land that we're sitting on, all the way back to Main Street. So here's the bridge. This is Nathan Jessup's land here. His brother owned this land over here. Another brother owned this. It goes back into here, and then there's more land that he owned back here. So it's a pretty big chunk of land. Now, from all accounts, I'm going to go to his bridge here. From all accounts, Nathan Jessup was an eccentric character, at least in his later years, and the story of his bridge, Jessup's Bridge, now the West Bay or Swordfish Bridge, highlights this. I don't have a picture of him, but if he looked like his brother Franklin, well, you get the idea. Recognizing that this spot would be perfect for a bridge like the Beach Lane Bridge near Mortimer Howe's property, and seeing the increased demand for folks to access the western portion of the Barrier Beach, Jessup appealed to the Southampton Town trustees for the right to build a private bridge at the spot. Permission from the town trustees was required because it was well recognized then, as it is today, that the trustees have been granted title to the land under the waters of the town with all rights to fishing and other activities within the boundaries of the grant under a grant from King James II in 1676. The Dongan Patent, as known, is still very much alive today, and at the end of the Revolutionary War, it was acknowledged in the Constitution of the State of New York, as well as in the Treaty of Paris in 1783 that settled the Revolutionary War. At the town meeting held to consider Jessup's application, it is said that over 100 people were in favor of it. Having a way to get to the western portion of the Barrier Beach would save a lot of time and trouble in an era without cars. Only one person, Mortimer Howe, whose boarding house was at the foot of Beach Lane, was opposed. Jessup's built a wooden plank bridge, you can see it here, this was the improved version, at Potonk Point in 1888 to connect to the Barrier Beach. But when he decided 7 years later to make it more substantial by using soil and rocks, the town and Howell objected and sued to enjoin Nathan. Now, remember that when Nathan received the right, we'll go to the next one. Remember that when Nathan received the right to build a private bridge and to get it to cross the land, you had to cross through his land to get to it, and Jessup could get very touchy about that. The townspeople thought that they were going to get a new bridge with easy access without tolls, like the Beach Lane Bridge. But that wasn't Nathan's idea. Reports here are anecdotal, but there are stories of Nathan using a shotgun to scare people from his property, and that he charged a toll to cross the bridge, to cross his property to use the bridge. Others were upset by the way the bridge had obstructed navigation. In any event, what ensued was over 10 years of litigation battles between him and the town of Southampton and Mortimer Howe. At first, Jessup lost and was enjoined from building his improved bridge and required to pay the town a judgment. But Jessup was determined that he was right and kept appealing and raising new legal issues. After years of appeals and lots of legal fees, ultimately, the pertinent court decided that Jessup had the right to maintain his original bridge, but he couldn't enhance it. It was a mixed decision for Jessup. Howell, on the other hand, who had a separate action, appealed the case to the United States Supreme Court. On October 31st in 1904, the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed Howell's appeal, keeping Jessup's victory against the town and Howell intact. Other little skirmishes took place, but in the end, Jessup's vision for an enhanced bridge was over, but he still had his original wooden bridge, which by now had fallen into disrepair and was generally closed to the public. What he did have was a lot of debts relating to his long legal challenges. It's another view. This is some of the houses that started to be built during the era. And that brings us to Bill Atwater. By 1910, Jessup's health had failed and he died in February of that year. His estate was land rich, but cash poor. And then William Cutler Atwater entered into our story. And just in time for Nathan Jessup's estate and us, because Atwater had a vision and he was rich. Today we hear about entrepreneurs with great drives and perhaps greater luck who make their fortune in the fields of the day, technology and the internet. Atwater's story is one of an entrepreneur who similarly made his fortune in the hot area of the day, energy, coal to be specific, and he also had some good fortune along the way. The Westhampton area and today's Swordfish Club in particular found themselves lucky to be the beneficiaries of Bill Atwater's business acumen and his love for the area. Atwater was born on July 4th, 1861 in Brooklyn. He graduated from Amherst College in 1884. Soon thereafter, he entered the retail coal business in Fall River, Massachusetts. 5 years later, he formed a company in New York, and within a few years, it had become a big success. He subsequently became interested in the wholesale coal business, and in 1900, he moved to New York, as I mentioned, to expand his operations, where he set up a new company. He acquired many fields in West Virginia in particular. Atwater's vision concerning the growing importance of coal in the late 19th century was right on the mark, and he rose with the tide as King Coal fueled an increasingly industrialized country. Although oil was becoming more and more important by 1900, King Coal stood unchallenged as the nation's leading domestic fuel source. Coal produced approximately 70% of the America's energy consumption at the time. And while there were several larger coal enterprises at the time, Atwater was one of the coal magnates of the era. Here's the answer to a trivia question. One of Atwater's biggest business breaks was when he won a contract to supply coal to the US Navy in the Spanish-American War in 1898. That set him up for future contracts with the federal government. His company supplied coal to the US to help build the Panama Canal from 1903 to 1914, and he had important contracts with the US Navy to supply coal for ships in the run-up and during World War I. Atwater and his family started to come to Westhampton earlier in the 1880s during the boarding house era, and from what we see of his later adventures, fell in love with the area. In particular, he loved sailing. By 1890, he was sailing competitively and won several silver trophies during the golden age of sailing between 1901 and World War I. He served as Commodore of both the Quantock and the Westhampton Yacht Clubs. He is acknowledged as one of the fathers of the fabled SS boats, for which the area is known and which he helped design in 1908 for his children to sail. Now, Atwater didn't do things in half measures. In 1903, he commissioned architect Henry Bacon, who later designed the Lincoln Memorial, to design his summer home, Brightwaters, on Quantock Bay, just off of Seafield Lane. Here's Atwater in front of the house, a Bacon-created, classically proportioned, 2.5 story, 16,000 square foot, New Georgian shingled mansion on 10.37 acres. The house is still there today at 66 Seafield Lane and is one of the grandest houses in Westhampton Beach. Bill and his wife Ida had a big interest in horticulture, and that's remembered today by the catalpa trees that run down Seafield Lane and also through down and frame the driveway to the house. They were originally imported from the South, actually South Carolina, by the Atwaters. Some of them are over 100 years old now. Okay, so here's where Nathan Jessup and Bill Atwater's tales come together. A year after Nathan's death in November 1911, Atwater and a group of summer residents, prominent businessmen, formed the West Bay Corporation and purchased Jessup's Potonkan holdings, including the bridge, with a vision to develop the land in an increasingly popular resort area. The Nathan Jessup property was to serve as the keystone to a new beach bathing facility, the West Bay Club, and a nearby real estate development. The map shows in pink the land that the West Bay Corporation owned. This is our site here. They owned all of this in here. The West Bay had 6 shareholders: L.H. Beers, Bill Atwater, J.S. Crane, Dr. F.S. Crane, W.Y. Vogel, and L.J. Bishop. The group planned to subdivide the old Jessup estate into 2-acre tracts to build a new drawbridge of steel and concrete, which they never got around to, extend a public thoroughfare across the Jessup property, which was right there, and it became Jessup Lane, this time without any shotguns in sight. And most importantly, a new beach bathing facility, bigger, better, and easier to get to than any other beach bathing stations on the Barrier Beach. It's a lot of B's, including the Rogers Bathing Station, which was the only one that could be walked to from town. Within a year of the Jessup land purchase, it became clear that the Westhampton Country Club, which was then situated right in here on Beach Lane, would lose its lease for its golf course, and there was a need to find a new, more permanent home. Atwater was very active in the country club, so he got involved to come up with a solution. Adding to the West Bay land purchase, he proceeded to assemble more land to create a golf course. It could only help his plans to attract summer visitors, which could only be good for his real estate development plans. The area in green here, and we'll go to another slide in a second, is also owned by him. This parcel, that's where the house is. This parcel, that parcel, all were other purchases that Atwater made. So to develop the golf course, he bought all this land. Now, this is South Road, basically in here. And at that point in time, there was this was Shore Road, which it became Shore Road, which he developed. He wound up digging out this canal and Shore Road so that he could sell houses along here as well. And he bought all of this land up in here. So remember how I said that Atwater didn't do things in half measures? By 1914, he had become one of the largest landowners in the area, with a view towards developing a recreation resort. As seen by the type of house Atwater built on Seafield Lane, the West Bay would take beach bathing to a new level in Westhampton. First up, after fixing the dilapidated wooden bridge, was the construction of a pool, the first on the beach, and not just any pool. And not just any pool, but a big pool. To do it, he hired Charles House, a Princeton '09 graduate, and the nephew of one of the shareholders, Lucius Beers, to design and engineer the pool. And he brought over from England, wait a second here. James C. Rossner, who had experience in building near water, to oversee the construction and get it done. That's the answer to another trivia question. The person who oversaw the building of the pool was from England. From 1912 to 14, the all saltwater pool was planned for, designed, and then built to completion. Notice in these slides the elevated edges, the diving board, and the walking areas and the sand surrounding the pools. I actually once saw a picture of the pool being built with horse-drawn cement sleds next to it. Norm Hubbard had it. I think it may have been lost in the fire when we had the fire over here, which is sad. But this is what it looked like. You can also see the cars that were then coming over the bridge, parking basically right next to the pool. Another shot of the pool. So this is Rossner about 40 years after finishing the pool, the fellow in the middle. Following the completion of the pool in 1914, Rossner moved on to Atwater's next project, building the golf course. Where Atwater had purchased the additional land. Rossner must have liked Westhampton, because when the golf course was finished, he stayed on to become the golf course superintendent until his death in 1954, 40 years later. Here he is receiving an award for service to the country club, where the James C. Rossner Cup memorializes his contributions to the club. He also served in the Westhampton Beach Fire Department for 33 years and was the chief during the World War II years of 1942 to 1947, when many of the younger men were off at war. So the West Bay became a big success, and to meet the demand, the facilities kept expanding. First, they built these lockers on the north side, on the bay side. Trouble clicking here. There we go. It's not me in the pool, no. By 1920, the main building, the pavilion, had been built. It, quote, afforded full enjoyment of the beach and ocean. In addition to the long verandas and overlooking the sea, there were about 200 lockers built around, spacious sun decks, and there was a delightful view of the surf that could be enjoyed from the tea room on the second floor. Right up there. And of course, there was a gift shop. Incidentally, Atwater was very strongly against alcohol. No alcohol was sold at the West Bay, and in fact, no alcohol was sold at the country club until 5 years after his death in 1940. And then only when the country club's leadership told the Atwaters that they couldn't pay the rent unless they got revenue from alcohol sales. That tradition has been kept today as part of the family club nature of this facility. Keith Morgan, who we'll hear about later, who is the next owner, sold alcohol at the Yardarm next door, which he also came to own. And some people remember the little bar that was up on the beach. Okay, this is a view of the pool looking east. Okay, so looking that way. After the pavilion had been built, the lockers were on the other side. There's a house right next door to us, right here, that at the time this picture was built, the person who lived there had been the coach of the Yale football team, and his parents lived there, and he would spend summers there. Later, it came to be the Surf and Dune Club, and it was owned by Warren and Francis Lewis. Sadly, they would die in the 1938 hurricane, and I'll tell you that story in a minute. Here's another pool shot. New lockers were added as the demand increased into the 20s. These all are, you'll see a view from above later, but this is all lockers over in here, in addition to the ones by the pool. The Roaring '20s were also felt in Westhampton, and some in town were concerned about the changes that were taking place in the community, including that the club on Dune Road, the West Bay. Beatrice Rogers, in her historical sketch of the village, pointed this out. Quote, "The West Bay had proved too modern for some of the more staid and dignified folks of the time, especially when it was discovered that women frequently bathed there without stockings." In 1927, as a way to preserve a way of life, the Quantock Beach Club was formed by a group of families, mostly from Quiog. It was a simple structure consisting of an open-sided pavilion overlooking the ocean with separate bathhouses for men and women, no gift shop, no tea room, and no hot water. Simplicity was the key. Incidentally, one of the West Bay shareholders, Lucius Spears, was also one of the incorporators of the Quantock Beach Club. Also, just as an aside, by the time her book was written in 1953, Ms. Rogers noted that, quote, "Beach costumes have become so abbreviated in the past few years that even the most circumspect no longer deplore the lack of hose." I wonder what she would say about today's costumes. Okay. Atwater made some very important hires during this period, during the West Bay days. In the early 1930s, he hired Norman Hubbard, first as a lifeguard and then as head of all outdoor activities and operations at the club. Norm was to have a role in the West Bay and later the Swordfish Club, of which he became owner for over 47 years until its sale in 1977. The Hubbards have had an important part in the legacy of the club. This is a picture of how people got to the beach in the 20s. This is actually its 1920 scene. This bridge was the old bridge, which was soon to go away. And you can see that people had hose on, I guess, as best as I can tell. Michael, having trouble with the clicker. Yeah. Yeah, they had a name for it as well as a casino. There was no gambling. But they had another view of it. These are some other views of the beach. Hey, Michael, is there a different way to use the clicker here? It doesn't seem to be clicking.
Remote, that little white thing in your
No,
hand.
that's not it. Where's that? Here? That's what I was doing, yeah. There it is. Okay. So this is an aerial view in the 30s. This is at roughly the time when the maximum extension of the West Bay existed. The pool is right in here. You'll see another view, and the sand and dune, or the dune and sea is right here, and that's the bridge right in there. This is a similar view. This way you can really see the pool right in here. This is basically the West Bay at its maximum size. Now, the West Bay Corporation sold the bridge. They never built the modern one that they said, but they sold the bridge to the town of Southampton, and a new bridge was built by the town. It opened on December 21st of 1928 to much fanfare, with a parade from the village and speeches from local officials. It was the first electronically controlled bridge in the village. It would not make it till its 9th birthday. Okay. Norm Hubbard's remembrances of the 38 hurricane was that the September storm was preceded by a very humid summer with lots of rain and fog when the beach had to be closed down. Quote, some days we could hardly see the bathers, and at other times we restricted bathing only to the pool. Here's the message posted August 18th, 1938, a month before the hurricane, from Bobby, quote unquote, to her father in Brooklyn on the other side of this postcard. Dear Dad, everything's holding together. It seems to have stopped raining. Jimmy fell overboard yesterday, but he seems to have recovered. Lots of love, Bobby. That brings us to the hurricane. The morning of Wednesday, September 21st, 1938 was bright and fair in Westhampton Beach. It had rained for the past 3 days, so that day was a relief. The New York Times weather forecast for the day was rain, probably heavy today, and tomorrow, cooler. Some of Bill Atwater's grandchildren went swimming in the ocean that morning. The day's weather would not stay that way, and the hours ahead would leave a physical and psychic scar on our community that is still felt today. No one knew what was coming. There was little warning, not the U.S. Cooperative Weather Service, which had rudimentary equipment in comparison to today, or local forecasters, and there certainly was no Weather Channel, which we're all watching right now. There had been a storm off of the east coast of Florida, but it was expected to head out to sea once it turned north. But instead, that storm headed north, building steam, and traveled at about 60 miles per hour, the fastest any hurricane had been known to travel. As the day's weather grew worse, Norm had the crew at the West Bay put away the outdoor chairs and umbrellas. Michael and Ben were doing that today, and batten down the hatches. The hurricane steamed northward. It covered over 600 miles in about 12 hours and started to hit Long Island just before 3 p.m. By then, the winds had been picking up and the sky had turned an eerie grayish green. The eye went directly over Bellport, just to our west. Now, hurricane winds are counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, so the most destructive part of the storm is on the east side of the storm, right where Westhampton and Quogue were. While the sustained winds were over 121 miles an hour, making it a Category 3 storm in today's parlance. With its forward speed of 40 to 50 miles an hour at that time, it had a maximum wind gust of 183 miles per hour. It wasn't just the winds that were damaging, though. The real destruction came from the storm surge, when at about 3:30 on a rising tide, already running high from the autumnal equinox, a powerful tidal wave-like storm surge rolled over the dunes, pushing water 18 feet above normal and pounding the barrier beach with 30 to 50-foot waves. Water and wood from destroyed homes rolled inland and caused more destruction. The water on Main Street, for example, reached to the top steps of Gloria's. So here's a picture of that. Now, this picture is, there was a number of inlets that were caused. I think there was something like 7 or 8 between the Moriches Inlet and the Quag Line. This is right next to the Swordfish. That's the bridge. And that's where the dune and sea were. This is Main Street. This is the Beach Lane Bridge. That's a house that's stuck underneath the bridge. Apparently it took a long time to get it out. This is Turkey Bridge. Now, I showed you before where that inlet was. Norm told me a story that on the day of the storm, after he had battened down the hatches, he tried to get in his car in the parking lot, but the water was too high at that point and was rising fast. So he went to the bridge, and the bridge keeper at the time, who was at Jessup, wouldn't let him in. And so he was on the outside of the bridge holding on. At one point, a rowboat came by and he suggested that they try to get into the rowboat, but the keeper of the bridge didn't know how to swim. So they stayed there. Now, what happened was the Lewises next door were on a piece of wood in the bay, just over here, with Norm looking down at them from the bridge. And Mr. Lewis let go of the piece of wood first. For years afterwards, Norm had to testify in court over that incident, because there was a presumption that if he let go of the piece of wood first, he died first. They both died, but that he died first. So his estate went to his wife's family. If the wife had died first, then the estate would have gone to his side of the family. So there was a big fight between the two sides of the family, and Norm was still testifying about that into the 50s. When the storm, when a strange calm occurred that dusk, 29 people had died. 7 new inlets on the Barrier Beach were formed between Moriches Inlet and the Quag Village Line. Of the 179 homes from the Moriches Inlet to the Quag Village Line, only 26 in recognizable form remained, with only about a dozen that wound up being inhabitable later on. So this is a view from the bridge. You can see the West Bay, the remnant, the remains of it standing there, of the pavilion. The West Bay Club, then the jewel of Dune Road, was no more. But the 24-year-old concrete pool had survived. Atwater and his family were on the Seafield Lane estate when the 38th storm hit. They all survived, but we can only imagine what went through his mind as he saw his remaining real estate holdings in Westhampton, including the West Bay Club on Dune Road, devastated by the storm. Dr. Keller in town said that Atwater's health began to decline after the hurricane, and he died on February 22nd, 1940, at age 78. With the property in ruins, the future of Westhampton in doubt, and his health failing, Atwater and his partners decided to sell the West Bay site in 1939 to a young 40-year-old insurance executive, Keith Morgan, who, by the way, is no relation to Al Morgan, who plays a role later in our tale. He had already made a national name for himself and was a promoter who could get things done. Although there's no hard evidence, I have been told that the property sold for $1 a foot of ocean frontage. It's about 600 feet. That would make it approximately $11,784 in today's dollars. That sounds cheap, but the real cost was in the cleanup and the rebuilding. And Norm Hubbard, who with his family had survived the 38 hurricane just barely, were there to help with those efforts. Here's Keith Morgan. Here's a picture of a smiling Keith Morgan sitting with friends in front of his cabana. You can see his name right up there. Keith was an insurance executive who summered in Westhampton and later Remsenburg, but insurance wasn't his real claim to fame. To know Keith Morgan, we have to meet Basil O'Connor. Basil O'Connor shown here inspecting the buffet in the ocean lounge of the new Swordfish, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's law partner and part of his brain trust. The O'Connors had a home in Westhampton Beach, Snug Harbor on South Road, and he spent much time there. He no doubt first attracted Morgan to the Westhampton Beach area. O'Connor had met FDR when FDR was running for vice president on the Democratic ticket in 1920 and became his legal advisor. And in 1924, 3 years after FDR contracted polio, they became law partners. He and Roosevelt and a few friends created the Georgia Warm Springs Foundation in 1927 to promote public support for the rehabilitation of those with polio. When contributions for the foundation fell precipitously during the Depression, O'Connor hired Keith Morgan, a young whippersnapper insurance salesman, to become the fundraising director for the Georgia Warm Springs Foundation to revitalize the efforts. The Georgia Warm Springs Foundation was later reconstituted as the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis in 1938, and in time, its notable fundraising campaign, the March of Dimes, became its official name. Keith went on to create the Committee for the Celebration of the President's Birthday, a yearly nationwide event that raised money for the March of Dimes, and he became its chairman. That organization, by the way, supported the work of Jonas Salk and others who led to the development of the polio vaccine. The foundation announced Salk's successful results in April 1954, and widespread inoculations began. Many of you will remember taking the sugar cubes with that. Let's go back to Keith for a minute. Keith had faith in Westhampton and its beach and decided to turn his dollars and marketing skills to creating a new facility where the West Bay had once proudly stood. On May 17, 1940, a headline in the Hampton Chronicle announced, "Work started on the new Swordfish Club at West Bay." From the first sentence, you can see Keith Morgan's promotional influence announcing its opening on or about June 15, 1940. Quote, "The Swordfish Club, a gay, ultra-smart, streamlined bathing beach and swimming pool, will open soon at Westhampton Beach on the glistening sands of the Atlantic. The Swordfish Club has obtained a magnificent site on the ocean, commanding a strip of spotless white sand unexcelled from Maine to Florida. The location is at the foot of Jessup Lane, where it meets Dune Road. For years, it has been known throughout the Hamptons as the West Bay Beach. There's a decided transformation is taking place. Rising from the wind-swept dunes will be a complete ocean bathing beach and swimming pool plant, modern, bright, with colors, but with swordfish blue, not the one you see noted today, with swordfish blue and white colors of the club used chiefly in the decorations. Smart cabanas with their attractive porches and cool awnings will line the ocean sands within sound of the splashing surf. Sun decks and lounges and enclosed porches will provide a magnificent sweep of the blue Atlantic and the sparkling waters of Moriches Bay. Ample parking will be provided, and eventually Swordfish Club Harbor on the inland waterway on the bay side of the site will have docking facilities for yachtsmen and for fishermen." Okay, that's a bit of hyperbole. Morgan also created the rope signature for the Swordfish Club, as well as the various designs that mark our coffee mugs today, and in the old days, the match covers, as well as the less used phrase today, quote, "reached by land, sea, and air." You remember seaplanes, right? And most memorably, to mark the enterprise, he had the iconic swordfish mounted above the front gates where it stands today. There was to be one more summer after its 1940 opening before the start of World War II, and that would have a significant impact on the nation and Westhampton and the club's operations in the years ahead. So let's take some pictures. Let's take a look at the opening Swordfish. Many of you have seen this card before. That's the Ocean Lounge from the outside. There's that boat that keeps popping up, by the way. That's still there. This is the interior of the Ocean Terrace, as it was called. A little bit of knitting was going on that day. That was right above this area here, where the outdoor gazebo is now, and some people dine tonight. This is another shot of the interior. Notice the band. I think we're having a band tomorrow night. We'll see whether they're wearing white jackets. Here's a picture of the outside of the ocean terrace with dining, and then note there was a extra seeing spot above that. Another view from the beach side. So there was dining out there, and you can see over here, the ladies are probably still inside knitting. They're right over there. Here was the pool at the time. The diving board was still the same 40 years later, the high dive and the lower dive, until it became the victims of insurance, where it became too expensive insurance-wise. You'll note the facilities down at the end. The men's locker room was here, the ladies' locker room, very much the same. What's not the same is this little piece here, which we're going to see in 1 second. This was the ring toss area by the pool. And you'll see there were two ring toss courts right next to the pool, and lots of activities took place there. Now, the thing about this picture is notice how the cabanas are not as high as they are today. They were much lower profile, next both on the dune and next to the pool. That was to change. This picture has to be a race day prior to 1954, because everybody is lining the pool. It's a kind of a classic day where there were races. I think this is probably awards being given down here. No B&T yet over on this end. This is the answer to another trivia question. This is the presidential candidate who handed out trophies at the swimming races. That's Al Smith. Notice his cigar. Yeah. Trademark cigar, I should say. And this picture is a picture of the lifeguards at the time. That's Norm Hubbard, who is the head lifeguard. These photos were are from after World War II. The war had a big impact on Westhampton and the departure of a generation of young men that were sent off to war, air raid drills and rationing and blackout curtains. There were concerns about German U-boats just off the coast lying in wait for the U.S. shipping vessels. In fact, one of Atwater's coal transport boats was sunk by a U-boat off the coast of Virginia. In December 1942, the Army declared the South Shore of Long Island to be a restricted area, and no unauthorized person was to be on the beach between sundown and sunrise. Like the old life-saving crews that we talked about before, the Coast Guardsmen patrolled the beaches back and forth. Manned machine gun towers were placed at the Moriches Inlet, and anti-aircraft guns were placed on the field across from St. Mark's Church. Rationing of food, clothing items, and gas started in February 1944, and there was a ban on pleasure driving, all of which had a significant impact on beach attendance and the financial results of the club during that period. On August 15th, 1954, the Japanese surrendered and the war was over. All of the church bells in the village rang out at about 7 o'clock that evening. And when people realized what had happened, they rushed to the village green and to the post office to celebrate. My mother often told the story of being on the post office steps that evening with 3 small children. And they were all happy as can be, I think because they got ice cream, as I remember. I wasn't one of them. With the end of the war, peace and prosperity returned to Westhampton, and Westhampton grew, and the summers with families returned. The baby boom that followed the war only helped rebuild the beach clubs on Dune Road with a future generation. So during this period, notice that the Swordfish is kind of a two-toned operation going on here, which is kind of interesting. So COVID-19 is not the first disease that it has had an impact on the Swordfish. Through Keith Morgan and Basil O'Connor, the club had an important connection with the fight against polio, a disease that instilled fear and uncertainty for many for a long time. People were frightened of catching polio from swimming pools and other public areas. The first polio epidemic in the United States occurred in 1894, and an effective vaccine was not developed in 1954. Not the speedy vaccine development that we had this past year. In the late summer of 1949, there was a serious outbreak in Westhampton when several children contracted the disease, and there were a few deaths, which rattled the community. The polio scare lasted for a few summers, and since no one quite knew how the disease was spread, children were discouraged from gathering in crowds or going to the movie theater or swimming pools. Parents were reluctant to let their children go into the Swordfish pool during those summers, but the beach seemed safe, so that's where they went. Still, the post-war years, with families growing, were a good time for the growth of the swordfish. But being on a vulnerable barrier beach leaves you to the whims of nature, and on August 31st, 1954, the whims appeared. Here's a picture of the flag on the morning of August 31st, 1954, before Hurricane Carol hit later that day. Both of them are straight out. The Category 3 storm had come up the coast and hit the area with 120-mile-an-hour gusts and heavy rains, with the eye going directly through Westhampton. Fortunately, there was not a severe tidal surge like the 38 storm, but the wind damage was significant, particularly on the beach and particularly at the Swordfish. So this is the ocean terrace, the part of it that was left, some of it was still on the ground. These are the cabanas right up here, in essence. So let's go back to that one. That's the ocean terrace side, another piece of it. This is the cabanas on that side towards the pool. There's that boat again. It's unbelievable. Now you know why there's only few of the cabanas left that have the glass windows. They were pretty much all destroyed in Hurricane Carol. This is what the bottom, the wood debris down by the office looked like. And this is a picture of the remnants, the remnants of the cabana that were in the pool. As if Carol wasn't enough, 11 days later, Hurricane Edna, another Category 3 storm, gave the already battered area a scare when it headed our way. It veered east-northeast, and most of its destructive power was felt in Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and the Cape, where there were 120-mile-an-hour gusts. But there were heavy rains and the wind and flooding damage in Westhampton, and there were 20 people died in other parts of Long Island. And while the recovery from Carol and Edna was still taking place, Category 4 Hurricane Hazel, which had killed 1,000 people in Haiti, gave the area a scare when it headed north before hitting the East Coast in the Carolinas and heading inland towards Ohio and Canada, but deluging Westhampton with more rain. This is also after the storm when they were cleaning the pool. Now, one of the interesting thing about the pool in the old days was that the pool didn't have the filter system. Don't tell the health department. Didn't have the filter system that we have today. And so what would happen on Wednesday evenings was that they would drain the pool that night. And so on Thursdays, the lifeguards and the crew would come in and they'd sweep the pool, which they're doing here, of sand. They would scrub the sides, etc., and get it in tip-top shape. And then on Thursday, later in the day, in the evening on Thursday, they'd fill the pool again with ocean water, which was the salt water, there was a line that ran into it. The pool on Friday was freezing. So very few people went into the pool on Fridays. Saturday was a good day in the pool. Here's a picture of Keith Morgan right there. This is after Norm bought the club. So this is in probably the late 50s. That's Keith Morgan. That's Norm Hubbard. It's the only picture I could find of the two of them together. Notice that the rest of the crew, my father's right there, but the rest of the crew really, you know, they didn't get out much. I mean, the only guy that got out here was Ray Mullane, who was the swimming teacher for a long time at the club. He looks like he, you know, has band de soleil going on. Okay. After 3 straight months of hurricanes, a damaged club, and rebuilding expenses ahead, like Bill Atwater before him, Keith had had enough. He had endured the lean years of World War II, and just when the post-war years started to look good, came the local polio scare for a few years. Then Mother Nature and Carol and the hurricane caused Morgan to call it. The natural person to buy the club was a person who knew it best, Norm Hubbard, who had been there since 1930 and worked both at the West Bay, the original version of the Swordfish, and was about to build the new version with his 2 sons, Ralph, Bird, and Gene. And they set out to rebuild the club. Keith, by the way, continued to own the Yardarm right next door for a number of years, where he continued to serve cocktails, but not at the Swordfish. This is a later view of the pool. Notice that the one before this had the green paint around it. There was lots of growth that occurred during this period, both at the club and in Westhampton in particular, as the baby boom continued to grow. This is the pool in the 1960s. Notice that now it's got, you know, there's those diving boards again. They haven't really changed much. Maybe they had some new paint, but now we have the B&T over here, and we also have the Western 12 cabanas. There it is again. Now, the interesting thing about this picture is here's basically where the steps ended, and there's a long flight of stairs that went down here, down by the dunes, and then the beach was relatively short. The beach today is probably, you know, it's like the steps probably end about there, thanks to the jetties. Famous picture of the cabanas from up high. By 1976, Norm was looking to sell the club. He had been approached by outsiders, but was anxious to preserve the club and sell it to the members. A group of members coalesced, and in 1977, Louis Auer, Howard Culver, I don't have his picture, Roy DeVries, Kevin Kenny, Joseph Kern, who was to become the president, Joseph McBride, and Al Morgan bought the club from Norm and determined to keep it in the family, to keep it still a family club that their families had enjoyed over the years. The last ownership change occurred in May 25th, 1989. Here's another picture of that crew. This is a photo I got yesterday. Louis Auer on the left, Joe McBride in the middle, and Roy DeVries on the right, just back from hitting the waves. The last ownership change occurred on May 25th, 1989, when a new cooperative corporation, the Swordfish Owners Corp, was formed, and shares were sold to many of today's existing members to purchase the club from the 7-person ownership group. And that's where we are today, which brings us back to our 107-year-old pool. It's hard to believe that, you know, that this is the last year of the pool, but it has survived for so long and has been at the heart of this club for so long and has been the source of enjoyment for so many. We are lucky to have had the legacy of Bill Atwater and of Keith Morgan, of Norm Hubbard and the Hubbard family, and later the 7 who helped save the club, and now many of the people in this audience are the current owners of the club. So thank you for coming tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I know that there's going to be some questions, and maybe if we have a few minutes, I can try to answer them. Don't ask me what the formula is for the cupcakes. Yes. Good question. The question is, do we know the origin of the name Swordfish Club? I dug and dug and dug to try to find that. Nope, I don't know. Yes. Tony Zaneski. Tony Zaneski was a World War II veteran who was friendly with Norm, and after the war, started to work for Norm in the early after the war. It might have been in the like 1954 from 1955. The interesting thing about Tony was Tony. I used to have lunch with Tony inside. He would listen.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so folks know, Tony was in charge of the cabana.
Right. Tony Zaneski was the person who was in charge of the cabanas. He would bring you would make an order for lunch with Tony. Right. He would clean up the cabanas, he'd sweep them, and he would bring you lunch if you requested it. He was omnipresent here, particularly in the dugout where he would go and have lunch. And he would listen to he was from a Polish family originally in Riverhead. And he would listen to the potato futures back in the days when Suffolk County was a big potato developer, source of potatoes. And he would listen to potato futures every day at noon. A great guy. He lived with his two sisters up kind of near where Circle Beverage is now, Circle and Beverages. And he died within a month of Norm, and he died, interestingly enough, from malaria, which he had contracted, and it was in his system. He contracted it in the Philippines during the war.
And he was the only person who would repair those director's canvas chairs, right?
Yeah, he would bring the canvas chairs. Would bring to him. Yes, exactly. Yes, twice.
I want to mention one of the things that was kind of neat too back in the day. Is that both locker rooms had attendants.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Because a lot of the people that came from the city in their suits and the attendants took care of all the lockers. They also shined their shoes. And there were some great characters who were, Jonesy and Bob Pugh, and a bunch of them were locker attendants. They had to go to the attendants.
I don't know whether everybody heard that, but there used to be locker room attendants that particularly for people who would come from the city, they would hang their suits for them. They'd shine shoes, and they were in
booths back too, right?
They were in there all day long.
They bring out your bathing suits.
And they bring out your bathing suits, and the 9, 10, and 11-year-old boys would drive them crazy. Right. We don't know who they are. Anybody on this side? Oh, up front, yes.
Before it was the Swordfish, when it was the West Bay.
Yes.
Was that a private or was that open to the public?
So West Bay was a private club. I don't know all the economics of it, like how much it costs and all those things. But Atwater was in the money-making business, and so he did charge something. I actually have been in contact with his great-great-grandson, who now lives in Illinois. And he told me recently he thinks he has some old ledgers from the West Bay that he would send to me, and then I told him that I'd give them to the Historical Society. So we may find out the answer from that.
Hey, Mac, one more thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hold on a second.
That gentleman first.
Yeah.
Do we know what happened to the boat?
Hurricane took it.
The boat was last parked at the dock, and I don't know where the dock is either.
Roughly the time when they put the jetties in, which, by the way, I don't know if a lot of
Yeah.
folks know, jetties are probably 20 feet, 25 feet high.
Yeah. So the jetties were put in after the 1962 Northeaster, which caused an inlet to occur roughly where La Ronde is. And one of the houses that was on that site wound up in the bay. It was a friend of ours, Reed Miller. Reed Miller's father bought the house and closed on it the day before the storm. It wound up in the bay the next day. He was in litigation with the insurance company for several years. So the house sat out in the middle of the bay, and you know, we would kind of go by in boats and throw rocks at it or whatever we did. Statute of limitations has ended by now, I assume. But shortly thereafter, the Army Corps decided that they were going to fortify this portion of the beach. I think it started in '64, lasted for several years. They used to bring those rocks over the bridge on long flatbed trucks, 3 groins at a time. And so it took forever to build.
They drill through the rock, put cables through the rock,
Yeah.
keep the cable on the flatbed, and then drive the trucks off
Right.
onto the jet. Drop it down.
Yeah. The thing about it too is, and probably another time we can get some photos of that, but when they were first built, you felt like you were enclosed in a cage because they were really high, 10 feet high or whatever it was, and they were right next to you. You could not see yard arm. You couldn't get the yard arm. Right, and they went out into the water, you know, a good distance. So you're now looking at 60 years of growth on the jetties, and you know, some of them still further west. I had to figure out where I am now. Further west are, you know, not as developed as ours, and also they were supposed to be built all the way to the Moriches Inlet, and the government ran out of money. The county ran out of money. It turns out they were pretty expensive to put in, and so that's what caused the scouring down where now Westhampton Dunes is, which led to litigation with the federal government over settling that. So with that, I think I'm going to say thank you for coming and good night.
Thank you, Brian, for all of your hard work on behalf of the Swordfish and everyone who has attended today. It was a wonderful presentation. We hope there's part 2 next summer based on some of the unknowns. Gives you a year to kind of research some more and find out what happened actually to the Swordfish as well as that boat. We hope you have had a wonderful summer. Please stay safe. Our cocktail party is still on for tomorrow night. But keep in touch versus in the, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, all information will be posted on that based on tomorrow's evolving of the storm. We understand it's not going to hit until Sunday morning at this point. So the cocktail party will continue with dancing and a lot of fun. So we hope you'll be able to join us and be safe on your way home. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your summer.
Terrific.